Welcome to Dishing Up Nutrition with licensed nutritionists and dietitians from Nutritional Weight and Wellness. We explain the connection between what you eat and how you feel. Stay tuned for practical, real-life solutions for healthier living through real food nutrition.
Slow down, you move too fast. You got to make the morning last. Just kicking down.
You know, if you're making breakfast or cleaning up the kitchen, stop and sit down because you're going to want to listen to every word of today's show. Judith Finlayson, a very special guest, is joining us today by phone. She is the author of an amazing new book called You Are What Your Grandparents Ate. Think about that for a minute.
Yes, think about that.
In her book, Judith explains what you need to know about nutrition, experience, epigenetics, and the origin of chronic disease. So what she's really saying is, where is all this chronic disease coming from? So, did you notice that she listed nutrition first?
I love that. Yay!
You know, and since Dishing Up Nutrition is a show and a podcast all about nutrition, I think we have a lot to talk about. We now have Judith on the phone, so I'm going to introduce Marcy. Mm-hmm. You heard her voice. And myself to her and to all of you. You know, I'm Darlene Kavist. I've been a licensed nutritionist since 1996. And I love how nutrition helps us live better lives.
Yes.
I think it's quite possible that I came out of the womb shouting, food matters.
I think you might have, Dar.
Because I've been trying to get people close to me at least, or a lot of people, to eat better since 1972.
Wow.
So, Judith, I want to introduce our co-host. You heard her voice. It's Marcy Vatsky. She's a very experienced licensed nutritionist, and she co-hosts Dishing Up Nutrition many times with me.
Yes,
so,
we always have fun.
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you, Marcy and Dar.
Yes.
And we're all on the same page with the motto, food matters for sure.
That is right.
That's great.
That's right. Well, we've really enjoyed reading your book. It's fantastic.
And we haven't been able to read every word, I have to be honest. But we read a lot of it.
We did. And so you're here today to fill us in on all the rest.
That's right.
Well, hopefully.
But, you know, Marcy's got a few questions for our listeners.
Yeah, you know, I think to get us started, I just want to kind of ask our listeners some key questions to just kind of think about this morning. So, do you have heart disease?
A lot of people do.
They do. Do you have high blood pressure?
A lot of people have that.
Yeah. Do you struggle with obesity or extra weight?
What, 75%?
I know, right? Do you have diabetes? And lastly, do you have concerns about your memory? Are you wondering? So if you've answered yes to one or more of these questions that I just asked you, I know that Judith, our guest today and author of You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, is going to help share how maybe our grandparents are to blame for this. I mean, we always have to blame someone, right?
Yeah. So, Judith, explain to us, to our listeners, how Grandma and Grandpa ate, or even our great-grandma and grandpas ate, are affecting us today. We'll just jump right into this.
I'm going to start by giving you a kind of long background story, but I hope you'll find it interesting.
Oh, we will.
And it kind of zeroes in on some of the key elements here. And it's about an area, I write about this in the book, it's about an area of the U.S. known as the Stroke Belt. And the Stroke Belt is a cluster of states in the U.S. where the rate of stroke is extremely high. It's intrigued epidemiologists, who are scientists who study patterns of disease in large groups of people, since the 1930s, because they recognize that the vulnerability to stroke seems firmly rooted in birth and early life. And they concluded that because they found that when people who were born in the stroke belt moved to other places, they took the risk of stroke with them.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So the question. So David Barker was a British epidemiologist who really got the ball rolling on the whole area of science now known as the developmental origins of health and disease. And that is the science that forms the basis, the core of you are what your grandparents ate. He got interested in the stroke belt because he could see that the long-term effects of poor nutrition were taking a toll on women's bodies. Because they were so poorly nourished themselves, because of these generations of poverty, disruption that characterized the areas that were located in the stroke belt, that they couldn't meet the demands of a developing fetus when they got pregnant. And basically, as you'll know, a mother needs to consume enough nutrients to adequately provide for the fetus. The fetus transfers the nutrients that she gets from food to the fetus, which helps it develop. The problem is that sometimes mothers don't have enough nutrients, and if they don't have enough, the fetus will draw on the reserves that are in the mother's body. And this is where the intergenerational element of the stroke belt comes into play. Okay. If that mother was not well nourished herself, she doesn't have the nutrient reserves to provide for the fetus, either in her body, because she wasn't well nourished as a fetus, or because she's not consuming enough nutrients in her diet. What happens on one level of development is if there are not enough nutrients to provide for fully formed development, healthy, robust development, the fetus will begin to trade off the growth of one organ for another with a view to shielding the most important organs, being the brain and the heart. So think about the kidneys. The kidneys are going to be one of the first to go because the fetus doesn't need the kidneys because the mother's body does those functions for it. So it will conserve resources. The whole developmental strategy will be to conserve resources by sacrificing development of the kidneys, and that means that those kidneys will develop with fewer nephrons, which are the components of the kidney that filter the blood.
Mm-hmm.
After birth, the kidney with fewer nephrons is going to need to punch above its weight to do its job. This increases the risk of hypertension and kidney disease, and we know that from all kinds of statistics and studies.
So Judith, for our listeners, just connect. So if the kidneys are not working well because of malnutrition, then that leads to hypertension or high blood pressure and possible strokes. A stroke. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I think, honestly, Judith, a lot of people would not be able to connect that, that whole scenario. Right. So then the next question I'd have to ask is, okay, if the mother was malnourished and so that affects the fetus's kidney function, does that continue on to the next generation as a grandchild? Did you understand my question?
Yes, it's complicated, and I think we're going to deal with that a little bit later when we get into the science of epigenetics, which is a little more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And also, there are things that you can do, which I think we will get into later.
well,
If you are born with, these are vulnerabilities.
yes.
And there are vulnerabilities that have been linked with chronic disease, not only kidney disease. I use the nephrons as an example and the kidneys. But there are other changes that can take place as a result of intergenerational poor nutrition. And they are largely related to metabolic health problems later in life.
You know,
Doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have those problems, but it does mean that you are at a greater risk for having them.
so, one of the things, Judith, I think that would make sense as we go on with the show is for you to go through a couple of examples of where there have been malnourishment and then the effects of that. And then the other thing that we need to do is, okay, so we've had that. So what do we do now? Right now, how can I protect my health? So just to kind of set that up as we do have some breaks that we have to go to.
We do, and we have one right now. So
Okay.
this will be a good time to let everybody digest what we just said or what Judith just said. So you're listening to Dishing Up Nutrition. We are talking with Judith Finlayson, author of You Are What Your Grandparents Eat. You will want to pick up a copy of this book. It's awesome because, as you have just heard in the past few minutes, this book really contains a lot of unique and very specific information, which has been so well researched and pertains to really all of us.
It does.
Yes, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Dishing Up Nutrition. Judith Finlayson's book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, has so much basic nutrition information that I suggest that you use it as a kind of a reference guide to if you have a nutrition question. She has included topics such as why we need magnesium, and we talk about that all the time.
All the time.
Diet and cholesterol, women and heart disease, and really so much more. So
Really.
we are back with Judith. So, Marcy, do you have a question for her to start
Yeah,
with?
well, I think let's just kind of take a step back quick to if Judith, if you could kind of tell our audience or talk about more times that there's been malnutrition, more like the Chinese famine, I think you spoke about in the book or read or wrote about. If you could just kind of talk about that a little bit more and how that affected individuals.
Well, yes, nutrition is very important. There have been now hundreds and hundreds of studies looking at the link between developmental health and poor nutrition in the womb. It's linked. One of the key links is low birth weight, and low birth weight is one of the factors that is a result from poor nutrition. 5.5 pounds or less at full term, and that has been linked with the development of many chronic diseases, from heart disease and diabetes, obesity, stroke. I know you want to talk a little bit about autoimmune diseases because
Yes.
The metabolic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, are very linked with poor diet, and the more we study that, the more those links show up. The autoimmune diseases are slightly different. They've really just started, relatively speaking, to look at those, and no one knows for sure. But the early research seems to suggest that environmental factors, and that would include poor nutrition, processed foods in particular, But toxins and something known as the hygiene hypothesis, which you probably know about, and that is that, we spent most of the 20th century really trying to beat pathogens into submission by developing drugs like antibiotics and so on. But one of the theories, and, the emerging evidence is supporting it, is that in killing off all the pathogens, we also killed off a lot of the very beneficial bacteria. Our bodies, our microbiomes are really a very delicate balance between the bacteria that are very beneficial and those that are pathogenic. And in our, quest for cleanliness and whatever, we have in fact killed off too many of the good bacteria, and this may be a link with autoimmune diseases.
So we've gotten too clean, haven't we?
I just wrote that down. We are too clean.
Too clean.
Yes.
A little bit of dirt never hurts you. I have a little section in the book called, just a little short section called, "Is your dog a probiotic?" And the answer is yes. So let your dog give you big slurpy kisses.
That's right.
Their bacteria is very good for you.
So, Judith, let's talk about just a little bit about the Dutch hunger winter health crisis that went on. I think because a lot of our listeners are maybe a little bit older, just kind of like myself. And, we can actually remember the end of World War II, or it's kind of that in our memory. So connect some of the health issues that have occurred after that.
Well, the Dutch hunger winter is a very interesting story from a research point of view, because it was a very focused period of time. It was during the Second World War, and the Germans closed off all the supply of food and so on. They closed down the railways and whatever, so no food could get into northern Holland. So all the women who were pregnant during that time were subject to extreme famine. That's where they talked about they were doing things like eating tulip bulbs, and they were lucky if they got 400 calories a day. And there was a huge amount of stress as well because it was the war. But from a research point of view, this concentrated situation was very beneficial because they had a fixed group of women who were pregnant during a specific period of time that they could study. The interesting thing about the Dutch women was that they were well fed prior to the winter, when they didn't have any food, when they were starved. And they were well fed when the war ended again, unlike the examples that I gave you from the stroke belt, where you had generations of poor nutrition that had intergenerationally taken a toll on women's bodies. So what you had in Holland were relatively robust women who didn't get enough to eat while they were pregnant. When they went back and studied, when they came across all these records and went back and studied them, they found that the babies who had been born during that period were twice as likely to have heart disease, more likely to suffer from obesity and type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol than babies who had been born under normal circumstances. So that was a clear and very well-defined period that showed us really very vibrantly the results of poor nutrition during pregnancy.
Amazing, isn't it? So, Judith, would you talk about where is this stroke belt? I think people would be really curious. What states would Minnesota be one of those states?
Yeah.
No. It's the southeastern United States. It's not Minnesota.
Okay, we're good then.
It's states that were most affected by the Civil War. So places like South Carolina,
okay.
Louisiana sometimes doesn't make the cut. But those southern states in that little concentrated area. And they've been studied a lot by epidemiologists it's a very interesting
We're just going to take
group.
we have to take one more break here, Judith. You are listening to Dishing Up Nutrition. Judith Finlayson is sharing her knowledge and understanding of the connection between today's chronic diseases and what your grandparents ate.
At the end of a busy day, it can be tough to get motivated to get out the door for another obligation. And once you're cozy at home, who wants to go back out? But you still want to work on ways to feel better, and Nutritional Weight and Wellness can make that easier. Right now, their popular Balanced Foods for Balanced Moods class is available online, so you can balance your time too. This class shows you how to use real food to reduce negative moods, increase energy, improve memory, and manage stress. And did I mention it's delicious? Get the same breakthrough coursework taught by the experts at Nutritional Weight and Wellness, but from your home and on your schedule. Learn how to feel better with the Balanced Foods for Balanced Moods class and do it in your slippers and sweatpants. Sign up today. Go to weightandwellness.com and register in a snap. It's online learning from Nutritional Weight and Wellness that helps you balance your time too. Go to weightandwellness.com. What are you waiting for?
Well, welcome back to Dishing Up Nutrition. What can you do to eat better for long-term health and weight loss? Because of the mixed messages about nutrition, let me suggest a plan that is based on a well-rounded menu of eating real food. The Nutrition for Weight Loss plan is not a quick fix or a fad diet.
No.
It's just real food. The best quality you can eat, the better it will be. And it will produce results, but it produces health results. It's just, we don't just look at the number on the scale.
We don't.
So the next Nutrition for Weight Loss series starts the week of January 13th at all 7 of our locations. Mm-hmm. And you can do it online anytime you want.
Yes.
So sign up today. This is the last day, and save $75 because our winter wellness sale ends today.
Yeah.
So you can call 651-699-3438, or you can sign up online at weightandwellness.com. So we're back to our discussion.
Yes, we are. We're back to talking to Judith. And I think what we want to, we've talked a lot about, female malnutrition during pregnancy, but what are some of the components around male malnutrition? How does that, jive with that? Like, if the dad was maybe a smoker or a drinker, how is that affecting the fetus?
I'm so glad you asked because while we had the break, I've been sitting here thinking, gosh, we're doing a blame it all on mom.
I know. We can't do that.
And that's not the case. So let me just, we have there are all kinds of interesting statistics on this, but one of the most interesting comes from a study done in 2017 on the Chinese famine. Mm. And it showed that famine, they were looking specifically at risk for high blood sugar, and they found that when both parents had experienced the famine, the Chinese famine was the famine they were looking at in this particular study, the high blood sugar was the highest in that group where both parents did, and that was the risk was 11.3%. When it was just the mother, though, listen to this because this is really interesting. Just the mother was 10.6%, and just the father was 10%. So the father's influence on producing offspring that had high blood sugar was almost as high, just 0.5% basically less than the mother's influence.
Very interesting.
And the other important takeaway from that study was that the risks were passed along to the second generation. So that if your grandparents had experienced famine, you were also more likely to have high blood sugar. We've shown, they're now studying things like fathers who drink too much, and finding that affects sperm in a way that increases the risk for things like attention hyperactivity disorder.
Right.
Okay.
One of the early studies was done by a British geneticist who showed that young men who smoked around the time of puberty were more likely to have sons who were overweight. And that's because what happens around puberty is that the sperm cells are forming, and if young men experience inputs, like there was a study that showed that if they ate too much around the time of puberty, their grandsons were more likely to die young. Also, studies that show that if women eat too much, with women, it's famine, and that increases the risk that their granddaughters will die young.
Really?
So
wow.
These results are basically come from the science of epigenetics, which shows that impacts like poor nutrition create what amounts to a biological memory on reproductive cells that is carried on through the generations. That's a gross oversimplification, but it's basically what happens.
So, Judith, I think that some of the listeners might be saying, well, I didn't have very healthy grandparents.
Now what?
So now what is right, Marcy? Now what? Because I could see people just saying, I give up.
Yeah, what am I going to do? This is all against me now. It's in my genes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, well, they shouldn't do that.
Okay, good.
We haven't really spent a lot of time explaining epigenetics.
Let's do that.
And gene expression.
Yes, let's do that.
Well, you are born with all of your genes, and they are fixed.
Yes.
And that's why people kind of think, I got a bad deal, and it's too bad, game over. But that's not true, because we now know from the science it's not necessarily your genes. Most diseases are not the result of a genetic problem. They're not directly linked to a gene. Some are, like hemophilia, but those are very, very small in number. Most diseases are what we call multifactorial, which means that a large number of genes are involved in the disease, and each of them has a very small role to play. How that role is developed basically results from something called gene expression. Mm. And your genes are fixed, but the environment in which your genes operate is not. And so they are turned up, turned down, based on things like nutrition Exercise is another one. So we can actually show by studying gene expression that doing things like improving your diet or exercising, even in moderate amounts, really has quite a dramatic effect on gene expression and can therefore balance off some of these vulnerabilities that you may have received from your grandparents.
Very good.
Yes. It's a mouthful.
So
I can tell you one of the most famous studies on this, and I talk about it in Your Grandparents Ate, because it really does show the value of nutrition. It's the agouti mouse study. And these agouti mice were mice that were bred to be very beautiful, but the people who were breeding them hadn't realized that in breeding for these beautiful creatures, they had were perpetuating faulty genes. And when the researchers gave them a collection of vitamins, they were able to take very sickly mice and not only make them healthy, but make 2 generations of their offspring healthy, simply by delivering this little package of micronutrients.
wow.
And that is really, for me, the most compelling study of the benefits of good nutrition, because it was intergenerational. It wasn't just the poor sickly mice, but their offspring, whose health was dramatically improved.
So what parents are eating now, right now, we can influence our grandchildren's health if we know what we're doing. You know?
Absolutely. And you were talking earlier about real food.
Yes.
People want some kind of magic bullet.
Yes, we know.
Advice. It's really very, very simple. It is real food. Eat whole foods, not refined foods. Mm-hmm. Processed foods are terrible.
Right.
I have all kinds of evidence in the book and studies showing what the bad things that processed food do to your body, and also to your descendants' bodies, because, if you're a female, the eggs that are forming, that you use to develop a baby, your eggs that mate with the sperm, were actually formed while you were in your mother's body. So if you're the grandmother, eating well, eating whole foods that are nutritious, can be directly linked to the quality of the eggs that your daughter will have, and therefore the quality, the health of your grandchildren.
It's fascinating.
So it's just, so the basic rule is eat real food, whole foods, not too much. Michael Pollan really had that one right. Don't eat anything that your grandmother wouldn't recognize as food.
Right, we're always saying that.
Anything with those with the chemical names, and also get off your butt.
Right, move.
Sedentary behavior is the other big negative one. Yeah. And, we have all kinds of studies, and I talk about them in the book, that show that
we need to take a quick break, Judith. I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's talk about these studies when we come back. So you're listening to Dishing Up Nutrition. We want to thank Judith Finlayson for researching and writing her wonderful book, You Are What Your Grandparents Ate, and for sharing your expertise about possible reasons for today's epidemic of chronic diseases.
Well, welcome back to Dishing Up Nutrition. I want to remind you to take advantage of our winter wellness sale, which ends today. Mm-hmm. So we're offering 15% off of all of our NutriKey products. and $75 off of our nutrition for weight loss program, and $100 off of our 1-hour follow-up consultation when we do 2 of them, or $100 off of our initial 2-hour consultation.
It's a lot of deals.
Yeah,
Dar.
a lot of deals. Just call
That's right.
651-699-3438, or you can look online at weightandwellness.com, and we're going back to our discussion.
Yes, let's do that. First on our way out, we were just thanking you, Judith, for being on the show with us. Sometimes at the end of the show, we don't get time to do that so well. But I also want you to share with the audience, what is your website? Because I know listeners tuning in today are going to want more information from you. If you want to share that information.
Thank you for asking. It's Judith at judithfinlayson.com.
Okay. And then, are you ever going to be in Minneapolis to come visit us in studio?
I'd love to.
We would love
I
it.
don't have any immediate plans, but you never know. So if I do end up in Minneapolis, and I actually have fond memories of Minneapolis because I grew up just north of there, and that was the big city. Used to go to Minneapolis for the weekend. So I'd love to come back.
Okay.
I'd love to revisit Minneapolis.
It would be really fun to have you in studio and have this discussion.
Yeah.
I think our listeners would be able to understand it better, and we could dig in deeper.
That's right.
We could. It's very complex, and it took me over 300 pages to explain it all in the book. But it once you kind of get it, it all makes perfect sense.
Yes. And I think what it does is it helps to take away possibly some of the guilt that people have today about their own health. They think, well, it's something I did or didn't do. Mm-hmm. And possibly that's true, but there's another reason for some of this. So,
and I like the idea that you have the opportunity to make a change, with this epigenetics that we're talking about. You have the opportunity to either turn down that gene, as you were saying, Judith, or turn it up, So, so it gives a lot of hope and control.
And as I said before, the background information of how all this happens is may be very complex, but the solutions are really alarmingly simple. And that's a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle, not sedentary behavior. And also toxins come into this, trying to avoid toxic exposure. That's something that we don't have a lot of control over. So, it's something to really watch out for.
But we don't have to go golfing on golf courses that have been treated with a lot of pesticides and chemicals. I mean, that's
good advice.
That's part of the knowledge that people need to have. So, Judith, let's go and talk, because we talk about this all the time, about avoiding processed foods. But I think if you could talk a little bit about that. And the other thing, I don't know if we have enough time, but when people are thinking in terms of having a child, what do they need to do with their diet? How do they need to look at this a little bit?
Yeah, what do they need to do?
Processed foods are really in North America, they are really the killer, because, as you know, they're high calorie, low nutrient. So what that means, when epidemiologists have looked at this, what they're seeing is 3 generations of people living on what the standard American diet, which is high on processed foods. And so many Americans are suffering. We talked a lot about the famines, the Dutch hunger famine, the Chinese famine. But in fact, many Americans suffer from a similar nutrient effect, which they call high-calorie malnutrition. And some epidemiologists have linked this to the epidemics of chronic disease in the United States. The runaway rate of diabetes, heart disease, because 3 generations of Americans have been really eating predominantly diets focused on processed foods, and we're seeing the effects in the intergenerational effects of high-calorie malnutrition, which have been linked, in fact, with the fact that, people are now, for years and years, we were expecting to live longer. Now, suddenly, that curve is changing, and people are losing years off their projected lifespan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we have to somehow go back to getting people to eat real food. And I know we keep saying this is such a simple message, but it's so hard for people to do.
It really is. It's too much work or something, instead of just grabbing that quick sandwich somewhere.
So have you personally always been a real food person, or did you go through it?
Yeah, probably. I've never eaten a lot of processed foods, and I think that's because I've always been a cook. I love to cook, and I love eating good food. So I've always liked the taste of good food, and processed foods just never tasted good to me. I never really liked them. So in that sense, I guess I was very lucky. My mother used to make me oatmeal every morning, hot-cooked oatmeal. And it's still my very favorite breakfast.
But I bet it was real oatmeal, and it wasn't the kind that was, I say it was, someone had eaten it before you even got it.
Right. All chewed up.
Yeah, no, it was real oatmeal. She cooked it on the stove.
Yeah.
And, good for her. I'm enormously grateful now when I look back for all of that nutritious breakfast.
So if a couple are planning to have, I think maybe we lost.
I think we may have.
Maybe we lost Judith. I think if we think in terms of if people are going to have a child, if they're thinking about pregnancy.
Right.
We know that it's probably, in the book, she talks about that they need to start looking at their nutrition at least a year before they even attempt to get pregnant.
That's right. And trying to change their foods, eating those real foods, getting rid of the processed foods. At 27, 30, however old you are when you decide that you're going to do that, you're not thinking about what you're, I'm eating better for my grandkids, but that's what we're saying today. Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that was really interested in what Judith said was that we have had 3 generations of people eating the standard American diet, and they're malnourished.
Right.
Overfed but malnourished. And we can know that there's such an epidemic of diseases now.
Right. And we're living shorter. So,
and it's whether it's heart disease or whether it's cancer, but we have a high rate of disease states. And so somehow people are going to have to turn the clock back a little bit.
Right.
And start eating real food.
That's right. And I think we have Judith back on now.
Oh, okay.
So here she is.
Yes, we do.
Oh,
okay,
hi,
good.
Judith.
We have a technical glitch.
That happens.
Well, at least it didn't happen at the beginning, and that's even better. So what we were talking about, maybe I guess Marcy's telling us we're going to have to roll it along here.
Yeah.
Judith, you're a great guest, and we really appreciate you being on this morning with us. And we would love to have you be on in studio at some time in the future. So
yes, very much. Thank you, Judith. Our goal at Nutritional Weight and Wellness is to help each and every person experience better health through eating real food. It's a simple yet powerful message. Eating real food is life-changing. Thank you and have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Dishing Up Nutrition. If you enjoy this podcast, please share your favorite episodes with a friend or leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. The content and opinions expressed are those of the hosts or presenters. They are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. Product statements have not been evaluated by the FDA.